There is a sound the Vellani forbid their children to make. Not a word, not a curse. A laugh, one particular shape of laughter, high and certain, the kind that comes when a powerful creature is absolutely sure it has understood something smaller than itself. We teach our young that this laugh is dangerous, not because it is rude. Because the last great matriarch who made it lost everything she was laughing about. And the only reason her name survives at all is that the very people she was laughing at refused to let her be forgotten. I am one of those who refuse. It is, in fact, my entire profession now. So let me tell you about the day the queen laughed, and the small gray-haired human who stood in front of her and did not flinch, and what it cost, and what it saved. Begin, as the records do, with the laugh. The throne hall of the deep thread was carved from a single grown crystal, a chamber so old that the light passing through it had been bent by the same walls for 9,000 years. When the matriarch Orineth spoke, the crystal carried her voice into every corner without echo, which gave the unsettling impression that her words were already inside your head before she finished saying them. She was looking down at the human delegation, and she was deciding whether to be insulted. There were supposed to be more of them. The report she had been given promised a proper envoy, a fleet officer perhaps, with a chest full of medal honors, or one of the soft-spoken predators who ran the human governments and smiled while they negotiated you out of your own atmosphere. Orineth had prepared herself for a worthy opponent. She had eaten well, slept in the long dark, and arranged the lighting so that her crown ridge threw a shadow shaped like a blade across the floor. Instead, 3 humans had walked in. 2 of them were clearly attendants, young, nervous, the kind who kept glancing at the third for permission to breathe. And the third, the one they deferred to, the one the protocol staff had marked as the speaking authority, was a small old female, gray at the temples, a coat that had been mended at one elbow with thread that didn't quite match. She walked with the slow, deliberate care of someone whose knees had opinions about the weather, and she carried, of all things, a cloth bag, the kind you might use to bring food to a sick neighbor. Orineth waited. She gave the human every opportunity to reveal that this was a trick, that the real envoy was behind a door somewhere, that the cloth bag held a weapon or a credential or a threat. The human reached the foot of the dais, looked up at a being 40 times her mass who could have ended her with a thought passed to the guards, and said, in careful, accented Vellani, "Thank you for seeing me. I know your time is expensive." That was when Orineth understood. The humans had not sent a warrior or a politician. They had sent a translator, a clerk, a worker of words, low enough in their hierarchy that losing her in a diplomatic disaster would cost them nothing. They had looked at the great empire of the deep thread, at 9,000 years of unbroken bloodline, and they had sent the equivalent of a kitchen servant to negotiate with a queen. And the worst part, the part that lit the slow fuse of the famous laugh, was that the human did not seem to know she had been insulted on her own behalf. She seemed perfectly content to be exactly who she was. Orineth's name in the oldest dialect meant she whose thread runs deepest. She could recite her own ancestry for 9,000 years without pausing for breath, each name a bead on a line that stretched back to the first mother who had cracked her own egg open in the dark and decided to rule. To the Vellani, this was not vanity. It was the entire architecture of reality. The thread, the unbroken chain of blood passing from mother to daughter, was not merely how you were born. It was how you continued. When a Vellani died, her memory, herself, her soul, if you wanted to use the human word, was understood to pass down the thread to those who shared her blood. As long as the bloodline survived, you survived. You were carried. But to die outside the thread, to die threadless, with no daughter of your blood to carry you, was the one true death the Vellani feared. It meant oblivion, not pain, not punishment. Simply, gone, as if you had never been, your name unspoken because there was no mouth of your blood left to speak it. This is the thing you must hold in your mind to understand the laugh. To Orineth, the human standing before her was already a A creature whose species could never join the thread, could never, by any biology in the universe, mix their blood with Velani blood and produce a child. The two peoples were as reproductively distant as a stone and a song. And so, to Ornith, the humans were a civilization of the already dead. Busy, clever, loud, briefly interesting, and doomed to vanish utterly the moment their short lives ended, because they could never become kin to anything that would last. She had been told the humans wanted to discuss an alliance, a joining of peoples, shared worlds, shared futures. She looked at the small gray human with the mended elbow, and she understood that the humans did not even know what they were asking. They wanted to join the thread, and they could not. It was not a matter of treaty or willingness. It was a matter of blood, and their blood would never run with hers. "You wish," Ornith said slowly, savoring it, "to bind our peoples together, to make us, what is your word, family?" "That's the hope," the human said. "And how," said the queen, "do your people imagine family is made?" The human, her name, the records tell us, was Esther Cole, 61 years old, a translator and a teacher and 3 other things we will come to, tilted her head as if it were a genuinely interesting question. "Different ways," she said. "We've got a few." "There is only one way," Ornith said. "Blood. A daughter of my body carries me forward. A daughter of yours carries you. That is what binds the living to the dead and the dead to the not yet born. That is family. That is kinship. That is the thread." She leaned forward, and the bladed shadow of her crown fell across the human like a closing door. "And you, little translator, your blood and mine can never make a single child between them. Not one. Your scientists have confirmed this. Mine have confirmed this. There is no future in which a creature exists that is both your kin and mine. We are sealed apart. Forever." And then the matriarch Ornith, she whose thread runs deepest, ruler of 9,000 years of unbroken blood, looked down at the small mortal woman who had come to make a family with her, and she laughed. It was not a cruel laugh exactly. That is what the records insist on, and I believe them. It was worse than cruel. It was delighted asterisk. It was the laugh of someone who has just realized that the conversation they dreaded will be easy, that the threat they prepared for is no threat at all, that the small soft thing in front of them is not a rival but a curiosity, a child playing at adult business. "You cannot be my family," Ornith said through her laughter, and the crystal carried the words gently into every Velani skull in the hall. "Do you understand me? Humans and my kind cannot make young together. You will never be kin. You will live your little lives and you will die, and not one drop of your blood will run in anything that outlasts you here. You are threadless. You came across the dark to ask the deep thread to call you family, and you do not even have the biology to be family." "It is," she searched for the human word and found it. "It is sweet asterisk." The 2 young attendants behind Esther had gone rigid. One of them, a man barely out of training, had a hand twitching toward the place on his belt where a weapon would have been if humans had been foolish enough to bring weapons into the deep thread. The other was staring at the floor with the particular blankness of someone holding very still so that they do not start shaking. But Esther Cole did not flinch. She waited for the laughter to finish, and Ornith let it run long, enjoying it, letting the hall watch the human absorb her smallness. When the queen was done, Esther set her cloth bag down on the lowest step of the dais. She did it carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to spill. Then she straightened, as much as her knees allowed, and she looked up at the matriarch with an expression the records describe as asterisk patient. And there is no Velani word that captures the exact patience of a human who has buried people she loved, and is no longer impressed by death as a debating point. "May I ask you something, matriarch?" Esther said. "Not as an envoy, just as one old woman to whatever you are to your people." Ornith, still warm with her own amusement, gestured magnanimously. "Why not? Let the ghost ask its question." "Your daughters," Esther said, "the ones who carry you forward, how many do you have?" It was a small question, a polite question, the kind a guest asks, and it landed in the hall like a stone dropped into a still pool, because every Velani present knew the answer, and every Velani present had spent their whole lives pretending not to know it, and not one of them would have dared to ask it aloud. The matriarch's laughter did not return. I have read the transcript of that pause more times than I can count. In the official record, it is marked simply as * silence, 4 seconds. But 4 seconds in the throne hall of the deep thread, with the crystal carrying every breath, is not a short time. It is long enough for a queen to feel the floor of her certainty shift very slightly beneath her. That, Ornith said at last, and her voice had cooled, is not a matter for translators. No, Esther agreed gently, I don't suppose it is. And she picked up her cloth bag again, and she said she was tired from the journey, and she asked if there was somewhere she might rest before they continued, and the audience was over. Now I must do the thing my profession requires, which is to tell you what the human did not know, and what the queen did, and why a polite question about daughters had cooled a laugh that had echoed through 9,000 years. The deep thread was dying. Not from war, not from plague, not from any enemy a matriarch could lead her armies against. The Velani were dying from the very thing they worshipped. For 9,000 years they had kept the bloodline pure. The royal thread married only the royal thread. The high threads bred only with the high threads. Blood was status and status was blood, and to widen the thread to bring in a stranger, an outsider, a lesser line, was a contamination no mother would permit. And blood kept too pure, for too long, in too narrow a channel, begins to fail. The eggs came less often. When they came, fewer hatched. Of those that hatched, fewer survived their first season, and of those, more and more were frail in ways the healers had no names for, because the healers were forbidden from studying the cause too closely. To study the cause was to suggest the cause, and the cause was the thread itself, and the thread was holy. Ornith had 3 daughters once. The records are gentle about this, but they are not silent. She had 3, and now she had 1, and that one, a young Velani named Scene, not yet of age, kept far from the throne hall and the eyes of the court, was not well. Scene was the last viable daughter of the deepest thread in the empire. If Scene failed, the thread of Ornith, 9,000 years unbroken, would end. And Ornith, she whose thread runs deepest, would die threadless. The one true death, oblivion. The thing her whole civilization had built itself to prevent, coming for the very queen at its summit. This was the secret beneath the secret. This was why the humans had been received at all. The empire was failing, and a failing empire reaches for allies, for trade, for medicine, for the simple distraction of a new player at the table. Ornith had agreed to hear the humans because she was desperate, and she despised herself for it. And when a small gray translator had walked in instead of a worthy rival, all of that despair and self-contempt had come out of her in the shape of a laugh. She had laughed at the humans for being unable to make kin across the species barrier, while her own kin guttered like a candle in a draught, while her last daughter coughed in a far room, while the deepest thread in 9,000 years thinned toward a single fraying strand. She had laughed at the threadless, and she was herself 4 heartbeats from threadless, and the human had seen it. Not the details Esther Cole did not yet know about Scene, did not know the eggs were failing, did not know any of the things forbidden to be spoken. But she had seen the asterisk shape of it, the way you can see the shape of a grief in a stranger's face across a room even when you don't know its name. She had asked about the daughters because she had recognized, in the queen's enormous certainty, the particular loudness of someone covering a wound. That is the first thing humans are dangerous for, not their weapons, their attention. They look at you and they see what you are hiding, and the worst of them use it to hurt you, and the best of them, the rare, frightening best of them, use it to find the exact place where you can be helped. Esther Cole was the best of them. We did not know that yet. The queen did not know that yet. The queen went back to her private chambers that night and dismissed every attendant and sat alone in the dark and was, by every account I have been able to gather, more frightened than she had been since she was a child cracking her own egg. because she had felt the floor move. And a queen who has felt the floor move never quite stands the same way again. They gave Esther a room in the guest spire, high up, with a window of the same grown crystal as the throne hall, so that the stars came through it slightly bent and strange. Her two young attendants wanted to talk about the insult. They wanted to draft a formal protest. They wanted, the younger one especially, to leave, to get back on the ship and tell the humans that the Villani had no intention of dealing in good faith, that the whole mission was a humiliation, that they had been sent across the dark to be laughed at. Esther made them tea. The records note this because the Villani steward assigned to the humans was baffled by it, that in the hour after being declared a soulless ghost by the most powerful being in the sector, the human envoy's first act was to heat water and find cups and sit her young people down and make them drink something warm. She laughed at us, the young man said. His name was Daniel. He was 26 and this was his first posting and he had imagined it would go differently. She laughed in our faces. She did, Esther agreed. And you just let her. You bowed your head and you asked her about her asterisk children like you were at a garden party. I asked her about her daughters, Esther said, because that's where it hurt. Daniel stared at her. Daniel, Esther wrapped both her hands around her cup the way old people do for the warmth in the joints. When someone laughs at you that hard, that's certain they're not laughing at you. They're laughing at something they're scared of and they've decided you're a safe place to put the fear. Did you watch her? Really watch? She blew across the surface of the tea. She told us we'd die and be forgotten. She told us our blood means nothing because it can't mix with hers. A confident creature doesn't say that. A confident creature doesn't think about being forgotten at all. You only mock a fear out loud when it's already living in your own house. The other attendant, a quiet woman named Priya, had been listening. You think she's afraid of being forgotten? I think, said Esther, that I asked her how many daughters she has and the whole room stopped breathing. She set her cup down. I've been in a lot of rooms when someone asks a number that everyone's afraid of. Hospital rooms mostly. You learn the silence. It's a very particular silence. She looked at the bent stars through the crystal window for a while. Their whole world is built on bloodline, on the idea that you only continue if your blood continues. So what happens to a queen at the top of that world when her blood starts running out? Neither of them answered. They were young, and they had not yet sat with the dying, and they did not know the silence she meant. She came in here ready to fight a soldier, Esther said quietly, and she got me instead, and she's furious about it and she doesn't even fully know why, but I'll tell you what I know. She turned from the window. We didn't come here to win a debate about whose blood is better. We came here to make a family between two peoples. And it turns out the queen of this place is the loneliest creature I've met in 40 years of doing this job, and she's terrified she's going to disappear, and she just told us to our faces the exact thing she's most afraid of. Esther almost smiled. People don't hand you the key to themselves very often, Daniel. When they do, even when they do it cruelly, you don't draft a protest. You say thank you and you start thinking very, very carefully about what you do with it. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. What do we do with it? And Esther Cole, 61, translator, teacher, twice a mother to children she had not given birth to, looked at her young people in a borrowed room under bent stars. In the heart of an empire that had just declared her a ghost, and she said the thing that would, in time, save a species that could not even share her blood. We show her there's another way to not be forgotten, she said. We've known it for a long time. We just have to teach her she's allowed. Outside the crystal window, far below, in a room no human had been permitted to see, a young Villani named Seen, the last daughter of the deepest thread, the final bead on a string 9,000 years long, coughed in her sleep, and did not wake, and did not yet know that the strange, small creatures from across the dark had arrived, or that one of them had already begun, without ever having seen her face, to fight for her life. The queen had laughed. She would not laugh again for a long time, and when at last she did, when the famous, forbidden laugh finally returned to the throne hall of the deep thread, it would mean something so completely different that the Vellani would have to invent a new word for it. But that is the end of the story. We are still near its beginning. Let me return us to the laugh, because that is how this story is built, the way our chronicles are always built, circling the one moment, drawing closer each time until you understand it from the inside. When the matriarch Orineth laughed at Esther Cole, she was not only laughing at one small human, she was laughing at an entire way of being that she did not believe was possible. She was laughing at the idea that you could be carried forward by something that was not your blood. To Orineth, that idea was not wrong so much as it was nonsense, like claiming you could be kept warm by a fire that gave off no heat. Blood carried you. Nothing else carried you. A creature that could not pass its blood into the future was a creature with no future, and you do not fear the opinions of the futureless, and you do not, certainly, call them family. She was about to spend 9 days being taught, gently and relentlessly, that she was wrong, and the teaching would not come from arguments. It would come from a sick child in a sealed room, and an old woman who knew how to sit with the dying, and a healer who had spent her whole life being forbidden to speak the truth she could see with her own eyes. But first, the days had to be wasted. Empires are very good at wasting days. For 3 days, the formal talks went nowhere on purpose. The Vellani court had 1,000 ways to delay without ever quite refusing. There were protocols to observe, precedents to consult, lower mothers to be consulted who would themselves require time to consult their own advisors. Esther's young attendant Daniel grew more frustrated by the hour. He was used to negotiations that moved, that had agendas and outcomes, and this was like pushing on fog. Esther was not frustrated. Esther was watching. She watched which Vellani came to the talks and which did not. She watched the steward who brought their meals. The records remember him only as the steward, a low-thread male whose duty was the comfort of guests. And she noticed that he flinched, very slightly, every time the great unbroken thread of the royal line was mentioned with pride. She watched the healers who passed through the upper corridors with their grown crystal instruments and their carefully blank faces. She watched, most of all, the things people in the deep thread did not say, because she had learned across a long life that a silence shaped like a wound is louder than any speech. On the 4th day, she stopped attending the talks. She sent Daniel and Priya in her place to keep the fog occupied, she said, and she went, alone, slowly on her uncertain knees, to find the steward. She had brought him something from her cloth bag, a small flat tin of hard candies from her homeworld, the kind a grandmother keeps in a coat pocket. The records do not record what flavor. They record only that she offered the steward one and ate one herself, and asked him, as if it were the most ordinary question in the universe, where the sick children of the high threads were kept. He should not have answered. Every law of his station said he should not have answered. But Esther had spent 4 days being the only creature in the empire who looked at him as if he were a person and not a function, and she asked the question with the particular gentleness of someone who already half knew the answer and only needed permission to be sure of it. He told her about the sealed wing. He told her there was a child there. He did not say whose. He did not have to. And then he did a thing that cost him a great deal, and that the chronicles honor him for to this day, though we never learned his name. He took her there. The sealed wing of the deep thread was quiet in the way that only the rooms of the very ill are quiet. The light through the crystal was kept low. The air smelled faintly of medicine, and of the dry, papery scent that the Vellani give off when they are unwell, a smell their own healers had learned to dread. The healer on duty was named Vess. She was not young. She had tended the high threads for most of her life, and she had watched the eggs come less often and hatch more rarely, and she had been forbidden, again and again, year after year, from studying why. She had buried more royal daughters than any healer should ever have to bury, and she had been made to record each death as misfortune, as weakness in the individual, as anything at all except the one true cause that she could see as plainly as she could see her own hands. The thread, kept too pure for too long, was strangling itself. She knew it. She had known it for 30 years, and she had never once been allowed to say it. When she turned and saw a human standing in the doorway of the sealed wing, small, gray, leaning on the frame to rest her knees, Vess's first instinct was to raise the alarm. Her second instinct, the one she followed, was to say nothing, because the human was not looking at her. The human was looking past her at the low cushioned hollow where the patient lay, and the human's face had done something that Vess had never seen a Velani face do in a sick room. It had softened, not with pity. Pity looks down. This looked level. It was the face of someone who had been in many such rooms and was not afraid of this one. In the hollow lay Scene. She was not yet of age by human measure, perhaps the equivalent of a child of 10, though the Velani grow strangely and the comparison is rough. She was small for a royal daughter. Her crown ridge, which in a healthy Velani would have begun to rise into the proud blade her mother wore, was soft and low. Her color was wrong, dulled, the deep living blue of her kind gone to the gray of old ice. She was awake. She was looking at the ceiling. She had the particular stillness of a child who has spent so much of her short life being sick that she has stopped expecting anything to happen, and so she no longer turns her head toward sounds. She was the last daughter of the deepest thread in 9,000 years. She was the entire future of the royal line, and she was lying alone in a low-lit room looking at a ceiling, and no one had come to sit with her, because in the deep thread you did not sit with the dying. You mourned the thread that would be broken, the lineage that would be lost, the catastrophe of an unbroken line ending. You did not somehow sit with the child. Esther Cole crossed the room. She did it slowly, her knees protesting, and she lowered herself onto the floor beside the cushioned hollow with the small grunt of an old woman getting down to a level she'll regret getting up from. And she did not say anything wise. She did not introduce herself as an envoy of humanity. She looked at the sick child, and she said in her careful, accented Velani, "That's a terrible ceiling. I'd be bored too." For a long moment, Scene did not move. Then she turned her head. Vess told me, many years later, that she had not seen Scene turn her head toward anything in 2 seasons. She said it the way you tell a story you have decided to believe is a miracle, because the alternative, that the child had simply been waiting all that time for one single creature in all the empire to speak to her as if she were a person and not a thread, was too sad to hold. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the story that gets told wrong. The popular versions say the human healed the dying princess. They are wrong, and the wrongness matters. Esther Cole did not heal Scene. She could not. The thing that was killing Scene was written 9,000 years deep into her blood, and no human medicine could rewrite that. Our healers and theirs would later work for years to slow such illnesses, to ease them, to give the failing daughters of the narrowed threads more time and less pain, and that mattered. That saved real lives, and I will not diminish it, but Esther did not arrive with a cure in her cloth bag. What she arrived with was harder and rarer, and is the thing humans are most dangerous and most precious for. She sat with the child. Day after day, while the fog of the formal talks drifted on without her, Esther came to the sealed wing and sat on the floor beside Scene, and she did the small, patient, enormous work of giving a dying child a reason to turn her head. She told Scene about her homeworld. She told her about weather, which the Velani, sealed in their grown crystal halls, found astonishing. The idea that water fell from the sky on its own, that the sky changed its mind. She taught Scene a children's clapping game, adapting it for the 4-fingered Velani hand, and the records preserve a healer's note, written in the dry official hand of the sealed wing, that reads simply, "The patient laughed today. Cause unknown. Recommend the cause be permitted to continue." And Vess, who had spent 30 years forbidden to speak the truth, began, quietly, in the low light, while the human distracted the child, to speak it to Esther. She told her everything, the failing eggs, the narrowing thread, the 30 years of recording the deaths as anything but what they were. She told her, in a whisper, as if the crystal walls might carry it to the throne, that the Villani were dying of their own purity, and that everyone who could see it was forbidden to say it, and that she, Vess, had watched 100 royal daughters die with the truth locked behind her teeth, and that she had not known, until a human sat down on the floor of her sick room, how heavy a thing it is to carry a truth no one will let you set down. Esther listened. That is the other thing humans are dangerous for. They listen as if it costs them nothing, and it costs them a great deal, and they do it anyway. When Vess finished, Esther was quiet for a while. Then she asked one question. "When one of your people dies," she said, "and they have no daughter to carry their thread, what happens to them?" Vess looked at her as if she had asked what happens to a flame when the fire goes out. "They are gone," she said, "threadless. There is no one of their blood to carry their memory forward, so there is no memory. They end." "You forget them," Esther said. "We must," said Vess. "There is no thread to hold them. To remember the threadless would be," she struggled for it would be to lie, to pretend a continuation that does not exist. It would be cruel. It is kinder to let them go." And Esther Cole, who had spent the years before this work sitting at the bedsides of the dying, who had held the hands of people with no children and no blood to carry them, and had promised every single one of them that they would be remembered, and had kept those promises, year after year, in the only way a person can keep them, looked at the Villani healer in the low light of the sealed wing, and she understood at last the exact shape of the wound that an entire civilization had been built around. The Villani did not fear death. They feared oblivion, and they had decided 9,000 years ago that there was only one defense against oblivion: blood, and they had made that defense so narrow, so pure, so sacred, that it was now killing them. And the cruelest part, the part that made Esther close her eyes for a moment in the low light, was this: they had never even imagined the other defense. The one her own small, short-lived, blood-incompatible species had been quietly using all along. You are not only carried by your blood, you are carried by everyone you change, every child you teach, every stranger you are kind to, every story you tell that someone tells again. The Villani had spent 9,000 years convinced that the futureless could not be remembered, and they had never once met a human funeral, where a person with no descendants at all is carried forward by a roomful of people who loved them, none of whom share a drop of their blood. "You haven't been forgetting your dead because you have to," Esther said softly. "You've been forgetting them because no one ever taught you that you're allowed to keep them." Vess did not answer, but the records note that she sat down slowly on the floor of her own sick room, which a healer of the deep thread does not do, and that she stayed there a long time. It could not last, of course. Empires do not leave their secrets unguarded forever. On the 9th day, the matriarch Orinith learned where her translator had been spending her time. She did not send guards. She came herself. The records make much of this, and they are right to. A matriarch does not walk to a sick room. A matriarch summons. But Orinith came on her own feet to the sealed wing of the deep thread, and the court did not know whether it was happening at all, because she told no one, because there are some doors a queen will only walk through alone. She arrived in the low-lit room to find a sight that 9,000 years of her ancestors would not have had a word for. Her last daughter, the final bead of the deepest thread, propped up on her cushions, awake, her dulled color brightened by the smallest degree, four-fingered hands raised, playing a clapping game with a small gray human who was singing some foolish, gentle, off-key human song to make the rhythm. And Scene was laughing. Orinith stood in the doorway, and she did not laugh. Esther saw her first. She stopped singing. She did not scramble up, her knees would not have allowed it, and besides, the records suggest she had decided long before this moment that she would not scramble for anyone, queen or otherwise. She simply lowered Scene's hands gently to the cushion, and she met the matriarch's eyes across the room, and she waited. The silence in that room was not 4 seconds. The records do not give it a number. Some silences are not measured. You were told, Ornith said at last, and her voice was very low, very controlled, the control of a creature holding something enormous very still, that the sick children of the high threads were not a matter for translators. I was, Esther agreed. You came anyway. I did. Why? It was not quite a question. It was the sound a wound makes. And Esther Cole, sitting on the floor of a sealed room beside the dying future of an empire, looked up at the most powerful being in the sector, the one who had laughed at her, who had called her a ghost, who had told her she would die and be forgotten. And she gave the answer that I have built my entire order around, the answer we teach our young before we teach them anything else. Because she was alone, Esther said, and no one should be alone, not even you. Ornith's eyes went to her daughter, to Scene, who had gone still and frightened at her mother's arrival, the way sick children go still when the air in the room changes, when they sense that something they were enjoying is about to be taken away. And something happened in the matriarch's face that the records struggle to describe, because there was no Velani concept for it yet. The closest I can offer is this. For the first time in 9,000 years, a queen of the deep thread looked at her dying child and saw, not a thread about to break, not a catastrophe of lineage, not the oblivion rushing toward her own name, but simply a small frightened person who had been laughing a moment ago and who deserved to be laughing still. It is a terrible thing, to be shown what you have been missing only at the moment you are about to lose it. Get up, Ornith said. Esther began the slow, ungraceful business of getting up. Not you, said the queen, and she crossed the room slowly on her own feet, a matriarch in a sick room, and she lowered herself down beside her daughter in the place where Esther had been sitting, with a clumsiness that told the whole room she had never once done this before, had never in her long reign sat on the floor beside her own child. She looked at the human. Her voice, when it came, was not the voice that had laughed in the throne hall. It was smaller and rower, and it asked the question that would change everything. Teach me the song, said the queen. And outside, far below, the formal talks droned on into their 10th fruitless day, the agendas and the precedents and the consultations. The whole vast machinery of an empire that did not yet know its matriarch was sitting on the floor of a sealed room, learning a foolish off-key human clapping song from a creature she had called a ghost, so that she could play it with her daughter before her daughter was gone. The laugh had not yet returned, but the thing that would one day let it return, the thing the Velani had no word for, the thing that is not blood and yet carries you forward anyway, had just been let into the deepest room of the deep thread. And it would not be put out again. What Esther did next, with the queen's grief in her hands like a fragile egg of her own, is the part of the story where one old human woman quietly rewrote the founding theology of a 9,000-year empire, and did it so gently that the empire thanked her for it. But that is part 3.